Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's crimes to the appropriate police in Massachusetts. So yeah, a lot of that kind of thing goes on. A lot of mistreatment of not only victims themselves, but also whistleblowers. You know, people who are not victims themselves, but who, in one way or another, blow the whistle on clergy sexual abuse by Unitarian Universalist ministers. Very often they were badly treated by their fellow Unitarian Universalists. They're ostracized and shunned and insulted and otherwise abused. It happens fairly regularly. So anyhow, we're just going to see if my camera is still recording here. And yep, here we go. Yeah, 18 minutes. So I think we'll go for another 10 or so minutes. We'll probably just wrap up the third half-hour segment of video and call it a day. We'll have been protesting here for more than an hour and a half if I've got 3 half-hour segments of videos with some breaks in between to cool down the sensor, which is in fact the case. But it's been an interesting protest today. Got some interesting interactions with the public. Got an interesting interaction with a young girl entering the Unitarian Church of Montreal who gave me a little card kind of thing. It's the first time something like that's happened in a long time. Anyhow, I'll just continue to circulate and keep an eye on the video situation, because the camera was overheating and that was problematic. So that's one of the reasons why there's some minutes of gaps between the video recordings, but nothing of any interest happened between them. I do try to cool down the camera when there's not much happening, like basically nobody's approaching the church and so on, or it doesn't look like there's going to be any kind of interesting interaction. So yes, Unitarian clergy abuse sucks. It sure does. And let's come over here and see the other chalk slogan. Unitarians cover up and deny clergy abuse. Well, you can't deny that. They most certainly do, in various ways, not only seek to conceal clergy abuse in various ways, but they also outright deny it. Most notably, UUA moderator Jim Key's outright denial of any sexual abuse of children by any Unitarian Universalist minister, or at least knowledge thereof, in his worthless apology to victims of clergy sexual misconduct that he inappropriately sandwiched into the middle of his first moderator's report to a General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association in June of 2014. So just over 3 years ago now. Now that apology, from my perspective, I'm not a victim of clergy sexual misconduct. I'm basically, the clergy misconduct that I'm dealing with is intolerance and bigotry, verbal and psychological abuse, various other abuses of power and so on. It's not of a sexual nature, for the most part anyway. I mean, if I don't consider any of it really to be sexual, but one could make an argument that the Robin Edgar Sucks blog is sort of a homophobic slur against me, and therefore could be seen as clergy sexual misconduct if it could be shown to have been produced by Unitarian Universalist ministers. And I actually have very reasonable grounds to believe that the Robin Edgar Sucks blog was indeed, at least in part, created by, I would say, 2 Unitarian Universalist ministers at minimum. There was evidence that the Robin Edgar Sucks blog was hosted on Reverend Scott Wells' WordPress account, and many of the blog posts carry the imprint of Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, also known as Peace Bang, who's a close friend of Reverend Scott Wells, and whose own Peace Bang blogs are also hosted on Reverend Scott Wells' WordPress account, or at least were. And the same thing goes with the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog. There was evidence early on, pretty well incontrovertible evidence, which showed that it was hosted on Reverend Scott Wells' WordPress account. But that evidence was since, removed. I guess somebody tweaked the settings of the blog to hide that evidence. But nonetheless, early on, notices were coming up linking the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog to reverendscottwells.com. And the only reason those notices would come up is if it was hosted on reverendscottwells.com. So yeah, we have Reverend Scott Wells and Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, who, are almost certainly, in my view, part of the so-called collective authorship of the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog, and therefore, guilty of the insults and slander and so on that are on that blog. And it's kind of ironic, that again, I don't interpret Rob and Edgar Sucks as specifically a homophobic slur, but it could certainly be seen that way. And it's ironic that Reverend Scott Wells is a male homosexual. If anyone sucks, literally, it's Reverend Scott Wells, not yours truly. So sorry, Scott, but just had to make that little point there, that if you are indeed, responsible in part for the for the Rob and Edgar Sucks blog, which I have very reasonable grounds to believe, well, forgive me for pointing out that you suck too. And you suck a hell of a lot more than I do, I'm pretty sure. So, sorry, Scott, for my sexual harassment. But I think you deserve it if you catch my drift. Anyhow, let's see now. Just going to check the time here. It's, okay, 24:36. We got about 5 minutes of video left. And I would say 5 minutes of protest left, unless something somewhat extraordinary happens. But I think we're going to wrap it up. I think I got here maybe a little earlier than usual today. I'm going to check the time, see where we're at. I normally leave at around 11. 11:03, so that's it. Once this segment of video is pretty well wrapped up, then this protest is pretty well wrapped up. And I will call it a day. But it's been pretty good, no major incidents, but at least one interesting conversation with a member of the public, at least one unusual and interesting interaction with a young girl who would appear to be the daughter of someone at least attending the Unitarian Church of Montreal. Oh, and the wind blew down my picket signs again. Another reason to call it a day. But yeah, it's 11 o'clock, it's past 11 o'clock. This is the time I normally end the protest. So that's pretty well it. We're pretty well done for the day. But I will just add that, I did communicate with the new president of the UUA, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, with 2 phone messages spaced more than a week apart. And several comments on her Facebook account about the issues, primarily the false blasphemous libel accusation against me that the Unitarian Universalist Association must formally withdraw and must apologize for, and also must disclose the truth about just how many Unitarian Universalist ministers, and I think we can throw Unitarian Universalist religious educators in there as well, are actually guilty of committing such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. I think at rock bottom minimum, the UUA should tell exactly how many and identify exactly which ministers have been charged, tried, and convicted of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and or rape and or other serious sexual assault, which may not be actual pedophilia rape. There may be some other serious sexual misconduct that you know, of a criminal nature, that the UUA should, you know, disclose. And then, as far as I'm concerned, the UUA should also disclose at least how many other Unitarian Universalist ministers and how many other Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers, religious educators, have been credibly accused of pedophilia and or rape or other sexual assault. There are others who have not been charged, tried, and convicted, and the UUA is aware of them, and I think the UUA needs to deal with that too and disclose that as well. They may not need to name specifically these ministers, but they should say how many there are. So let's see where we are time-wise. Almost done here. Got about a minute and a half left. So I'm glad we got all this recorded, and I think I'm actually going to start packing up picket signs now. We're going to continue to circulate, but yeah, well, you know, yeah, Church of the Image Tarnishing Ministers. This was actually originally singular, originally applied to Reverend Ray Drennan, and was inspired by his image tarnishing attack on Pierre Elliott Trudeau's Roman Catholic state funeral, although Reverend Ray Drennan tarnished the image of the Unitarian Church of Montreal and Unitarian Universalism more generally in other ways, including his attacks on me, which were publicized in Montreal media to some extent. But as you can see, I pluralized it. It applies to Reverend Diane Rollert herself, but it applies to numerous other Unitarian Universalist ministers. You know, it applies to Reverend Dr. Peter Morales, who tarnished the image of Unitarian Universalism by arranging to have the UUA's Canadian attorney falsely accuse me of blasphemous libel and legal bling intended to conceal pedophilia and rape. I'd say that's pretty image tarnishing. And so on and so forth. Reverend Victoria Weinstein's insulting and abusive attacks on people, which, you know, basically haven't ended. I think she's toned down her act a little bit in recent years, but you know, she's still attacking and insulting and abusing people online. Happens fairly regularly. She regularly gets into trouble for it. Anyway, we're done here. We're finished up.